The day my son placed that folder on my kitchen table and said, "Mom, you just need to sign," I realized I had been raising a stranger for 38 years. He stood there in his good suit, the charcoal one I'd bought him for his bar exam celebration back in 2009, briefcase in one hand, pen already uncapped in the other. Like he'd rehearsed this. Like he'd practiced in the mirror how to look concerned while handing his mother the documents that would take everything she'd spent her life building. My daughter Angela sat to his left, eyes fixed on the tablecloth I'd embroidered by hand the year she was born. Pink and yellow flowers. She used to trace them with her little finger when she was 3 years old, sitting in my lap at Sunday dinner. She wasn't tracing anything now. She wasn't looking at me at all. Her husband Todd stood near the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed, the way men stand when they want to look like they belong in a room they have no business being in. I looked at that folder. 47 pages, tabbed and organized. Derek had always been meticulous. I'll give him that. Then I looked at my son's face, and I thought about Raymond, about the way Raymond used to say, "Sonia May, you can read a balance sheet faster than any man I ever met," about the way he'd laugh when he said it. Proud, not threatened. 37 years of building something together, Raymond and I. 37 years of Saturday mornings checking property listings, of arguing over repair costs and agreeing on long-term vision, of holding hands in the car on the way home from closing after closing after closing. Raymond had been gone 14 months, and here was our son, standing in my kitchen with a capped pen and a practiced expression, asking me to sign away the right to make a single decision about everything Raymond and I had built. I didn't sign. I didn't cry either. I set the folder down, smoothed the edge with 2 fingers the way I used to smooth balance sheets before a board presentation, and I looked Derek straight in the eye. "How many more days do you need before you think you've already won?" He blinked. Just once. But I saw it. Then I stood up, went to the kitchen counter, and put the kettle on. The way I'd been putting kettles on since 1985. The way I intended to keep putting kettles on for as long as God saw fit to keep me in this house. The conversation, as far as I was concerned, was over. What Derek didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been watching since November of the previous year. That while they were busy making plans, I had been making plans of my own. That the woman they thought was just a grieving 64-year-old widow, too overwhelmed to understand the paperwork, had spent 35 years as a senior accountant and knew exactly what it looked like when someone was rearranging the books. They had prepared for 8 months. I had been preparing for 11. I was born Sonia Mae Johnson in the summer of 1960 in Savannah, Georgia, in a house with a screen door that never closed properly, and a mother who could stretch a pound of ground beef into 3 separate meals without anyone leaving the table hungry. My father, Robert Johnson, was an electrician, worked for the city for 22 years, never missed a day unless he was sick, and even then, my mother said, he'd get halfway dressed before she made him get back in bed. He believed in 2 things absolutely: doing your work right the first time, and writing everything down. He kept a ledger on the kitchen shelf, nothing fancy, just a composition notebook, where he recorded every dollar that came in and every dollar that went out, every month, without fail. I watched him do it from the time I was old enough to sit still. By the time I was 12, I was helping him. By the time I was 16, I was doing it myself while he looked over my shoulder. "Numbers don't lie, Sonia Mae," he used to say. "People lie. Circumstances change. But numbers will always tell you the truth if you know how to read them." I took that with me to Spelman College in Atlanta in the fall of 1978, the first person in my family to go away to a 4-year university. I studied accounting because I understood it and because I was good at it. Not because anyone told me to, not because it was expected. Because numbers made sense to me in a way that people sometimes didn't. Because a well-kept ledger was one of the most honest things in the world. I graduated in May of 1982 with honors and a job offer from Turner Broadcasting already in hand. Moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in southwest Atlanta, bought my first used car, a 1979 Buick Skylark with 2 rust spots and excellent air conditioning, and went to work. I met Raymond Washington 2 years later at a church picnic. He was standing near the food table arguing good-naturedly with Pastor Okafor's predecessor about the load-bearing capacity of the new fellowship hall the church was planning to build. He was a civil and structural engineer, Raymond. He spoke about buildings the way some men speak about poetry, with genuine feeling, with a belief that what he was saying mattered. He turned around and caught me listening. "You agree with me or with him?" he asked, nodding toward the pastor. I don't know enough about load-bearing walls to have an opinion, I said. But your math is right. He looked at me for a second like I'd said something surprising. Then he smiled, that wide, easy Raymond Washington smile that I would spend the next 37 years being grateful for. I'm Raymond, he said. I know, I said. I'm Sonia. We were married in June of 1985 in my mother's backyard in Savannah, with 40 people and more food than any of us could eat. Raymond wore a cream-colored suit. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings. My father shook Raymond's hand at the reception and said quietly, so only the three of us could hear, You take care of my girl. Yes, sir, Raymond said, every single day, and he did. People think wealth is something that happens to you. Either you're born into it or you stumble into it or someone hands it to you. Raymond and I knew the truth. Wealth is something you build on purpose, one decision at a time, over years and decades, with patience and discipline, and a willingness to delay what you want now for what you need later. We bought our first property in 1988, a duplex on Semmes Street in East Point. 2 units, both occupied, cash flow positive from day one. Price, $67,000. We'd saved for 4 years to make that down payment. Raymond inspected every inch of that building himself before we signed. I ran the numbers 6 different ways before I let us commit. It wasn't glamorous. We were landlords. We got calls at 11 o'clock at night about burst pipes. We had tenants who paid late and tenants who didn't pay at all, and we learned, sometimes the hard way, how to handle both. But we learned, and we kept going. By 1993, we were ready to buy our family home, a 4-bedroom colonial in Buckhead, the neighborhood in Atlanta where Raymond had always said he wanted to raise his children. $187,000. The mortgage officer at the bank looked at us across the desk like he was doing us a favor. Raymond looked right back at him with that calm, steady Raymond Washington look that said, I have done my homework, and I know exactly what I am doing, and we walked out of that bank with our paperwork in order and our heads held high. We raised Derek and Angela in that house, celebrated birthdays and Christmases and graduations in that house, prayed in that house, grieved in that house when Raymond's mother passed, when my father passed, when we lost the baby between Angela and Derek that we never talked about but never forgot. Over the years, we added 2 more rental properties, a townhouse in College Park in 1998 and a single-family home in Decatur in 2004. Raymond managed the physical properties, inspections, repairs, tenant relationships. I managed the finances, leases, taxes, insurance, reserves, reinvestment. We were a team in this truest sense. Neither of us could have done it without the other. By the time Raymond was diagnosed in January of 2022, pancreatic cancer, stage 3, delivered by a doctor who was kind but could not soften what he was saying, our total assets stood at roughly $2.5 million. Not generational wealth on the scale that gets written about in magazines, but real wealth, built wealth, our wealth. The house in Buckhead, now worth approximately $1.4 million. The 3 rental properties, collectively worth $680,000. Retirement and investment accounts totaling $420,000. Every dollar of it earned and documented and accounted for. I knew those numbers the way I knew my own children's birthdays, the way I knew the sound of Raymond's breathing when he was asleep. Perfectly, completely, by heart. Derek was 36 when Raymond was diagnosed. He had graduated from Emory Law School in 2010, passed the bar on his first attempt, and built a practice in Midtown Atlanta, specializing in estate law and corporate transactions. He was precise, articulate, and professionally impressive. Clients trusted him. Judges respected him. As his mother, I was proud of those things. I was also aware, in the way that mothers are aware of things they can't always name, that Derek's relationship with money had always been complicated. Not in the visible ways. He wasn't reckless, wasn't flashy, but there was something in him that measured people by what they had, that looked at Raymond's properties and saw not what they represented, sacrifice, patience, love, but what they were worth on the current market. He'd been divorced since 2019, no children. He lived in a condominium in Midtown that he'd purchased for $890,000, more than he should have spent in my professional opinion, but that was his business. He drove a car I didn't ask about and wore watches I didn't comment on. He called me every Sunday, without fail, right after noon, for exactly 20 to 25 minutes. I had learned, somewhere around the third year of those calls, that they were less about talking to me and more about performing the role of a good son. I accepted it for what it was. Angela was 33 when her father got sick, and she was the child who looked most like Raymond. Same wide forehead, same slow smile, same quality of stillness when she was thinking through something difficult. She had married Todd Price in 2013, a real estate broker from Marietta who was charming at parties and unreliable about most other things. I had never said a word against Todd to Angela, not once in 10 years, but I had watched. Todd had a gift for enthusiasm that consistently outpaced his results. He'd been in 3 different real estate agencies in a decade, always leaving under circumstances that were someone else's fault. Their house in Sandy Springs, purchased in 2018 with a mortgage of $4,200 a month, was more than Todd's income could reliably cover. I knew this because Angela, twice in the last 3 years, had come to me with that particular look on her face, the one she'd had since childhood when she needed something but didn't know how to ask. I had given her money on those occasions. Not a loan, though we called it that for the sake of everyone's dignity. $47,000 over 5 years. Because she was my daughter, and I loved her, and because sometimes love means pretending you don't know what you know. Then there was Jerome, Raymond's younger brother, 61 years old, living in Macon with his wife Claire. Jerome was the kind of man who had spent his life quietly measuring himself against his older brother and finding the measurement uncomfortable. He worked in construction, same as Raymond had started. But where Raymond had discipline, Jerome had ambition without strategy, the most dangerous combination. Raymond loved Jerome with the uncomplicated loyalty of an older brother. He never said a critical word about him. But there was a piece of land outside Macon, 4 acres, purchased jointly in 1997 for $42,000, that Raymond had always said was meant for me. That had been the plan, the spoken understanding between brothers. The land was in both their names. When Raymond died, it would pass to me. After Raymond passed, Jerome started calling Derek more often than he called me. I noticed. I filed it away. I kept smiling at family dinners. Because that is what you do when you are Sonia Washington, 64 years old, 35 years of accounting behind you, and you have just found a small blue notebook in the bottom drawer of your late husband's desk that changes everything you thought you understood about the last year of his life. It was a Thursday in February of 2023, 5 months after Raymond's funeral. I was doing what I had been doing every other weekend since October, slowly, deliberately, going through Raymond's things. Not to erase him, to keep him, to know what he'd been thinking in those last months when the chemo made it hard for him to talk, and I could see the effort it cost him just to stay present in a conversation. His desk was the last thing I'd worked up the courage to open. Raymond had kept a personal notebook, small blue cover, spiral bound, the kind you can buy 3 for $1 at a drugstore. He'd kept one every year since I'd known him. Not a diary exactly, more like a running record of things he was thinking about, decisions he was turning over, questions he hadn't answered yet. He'd shown me pages over the years sometimes. Other times he kept them private. I respected that. I had never read one without being invited. I picked it up from the back of the drawer. His handwriting was on the cover in black marker, Raymond W. 2022, and I sat down in his chair and I held it for a moment before I opened it. Most of the pages were what I expected. Notes about the properties. A few thoughts about a book he'd been reading. A prayer he'd written out in March before the diagnosis got worse, asking God to let him see Angela's kids grow up. That one I had to put down and walk away from for a while. The last written page was near the back. The handwriting was different from the earlier entries. Smaller, slower, the pen pressing harder in some places and barely touching the paper in others. The handwriting of a man who was fighting to hold a thought together. Sonia, if you find this, ask Lorraine Dupree about the amendment from March. I don't remember what I signed. Derek said routine. I wasn't sure. I'm sorry. That was all. 6 sentences. Written by a man who had spent 37 years being sure of things, of structures, of load-bearing walls, of whether a foundation would hold, and who, in the end, had not been sure. I read it 3 times. Then I folded the notebook carefully, placed it in the zippered pocket of my purse, and went to the kitchen to find the phone number for Lorraine Dupree. I want to be honest about something. By the time I found Raymond's notebook in February, I had already suspected for 3 months that something was wrong. Not because of any single large thing, because of small things. The kind of small things that only register if you have spent your career paying attention to the spaces between numbers, to what is missing, to what has been moved, to what shows up in the wrong column. In October of 2022, 1 month after Raymond's funeral, Derek had offered to help me manage the paperwork. I was grieving. I was exhausted. I agreed to give him limited access to the joint checking account. View only. Nothing more. In November, he had suggested consolidating the investment accounts. It'll be easier to manage, Mom. Everything in one place. He'd brought paperwork to my kitchen table, 3 or 4 documents, explaining each one quickly, turning pages before I'd finished reading. I was tired. I trusted him. I signed. That night, something made me uneasy. I couldn't name it at first. It was the feeling I used to get at work when a set of books was almost right, but not quite. When the numbers themselves were correct, but the story they were telling didn't match the story someone was trying to tell me. The next morning, I drove to the FedEx office on Peachtree, and I made photocopies of every trust document, every property deed, every account statement I had in the house. Every single one. I put the originals back. I took the copies to the Wells Fargo branch on East Ponce de Leon in Decatur, opened a safe deposit box in my name only, and locked them inside. I didn't tell anyone, because I am Sonia Washington, and my father kept a ledger on that kitchen shelf in Savannah for 22 years, and the first thing he taught me was this: before you can prove anything to anyone else, you have to be able to prove it to yourself. I was proving it to myself. They thought they were taking everything from a grieving old woman who wouldn't know what hit her. They forgot that the grieving old woman had been reading balance sheets since before they were born, and she had been reading theirs for 3 months. The offices of Dupree Estate Law were on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Street, the kind of address that communicated competence without pretension. No marble lobby, no artwork that cost more than a car, just clean lines, good lighting, and the particular quiet of a place where serious work got done. I had known of Lorraine Dupree by reputation for several years. She was well regarded in Atlanta's black professional community, known for estate litigation, known for being thorough, known for not being impressed by people who expected her to be impressed by them. A mutual friend from my church had given me her name in November, around the same time I was making copies at FedEx office and trying to name the unease I was feeling. I had not called her then. I wasn't ready. I needed to know more before I walked into anyone's office. By March of 2023, I was ready. I called on a Monday. Her assistant scheduled me for that Thursday. I arrived 8 minutes early with my red folder, the one I'd been adding to since November, and I sat in the waiting room, and I looked out at the Atlanta skyline, and I thought about Raymond. About the way he used to say that the most important thing about any structure wasn't how it looked when everything was going right. It was how it held when something went wrong. Hold, I told myself, just hold. Lorraine Dupree was 55 years old, with natural gray locks pulled back from her face and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She shook my hand with a firm, dry grip and led me into her office and closed the door. She didn't offer small talk. I appreciated that. "Tell me everything," she said. "Start at the beginning and don't leave anything out." I talked for 40 minutes. She took notes by hand in a yellow legal pad and didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she picked up her pen and tapped it against the pad twice, a habit I would learn that meant she was organizing her thoughts. "The notebook," she said. "You have it with you?" I took it from my purse and placed it on the desk. She read Raymond's last entry without touching the notebook, leaning forward over it with her glasses on. Then she sat back. "And the copies of the original trust documents, you have those in the safe deposit box?" "Yes, along with 3 months of bank statements from before Derek had any account access, all property deeds, insurance records, and the original trust declaration from 2018. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition. "Mrs. Washington," she said, "most clients come to me after the damage is done and they have nothing. You came to me with a foundation." "I was an accountant for 35 years, I said. "I don't go into a meeting without documentation." She almost smiled. "No, I can see that." Then she reached across her desk for a manila folder and opened it, and the next hour of my life rearranged itself in a way I had been preparing for and still was not fully prepared for. What Lorraine had already begun researching, because the moment I'd called her office in March, she had pulled the public probate records for Fulton County, was the document filed under the name Washington Family Revocable Living Trust, Amendment Number 3. Filed date, April 3rd, 2022. Execution date stated on the document, March 14th, 2022. Notarized by David R. Hargrove, Notary Public, Fulton County. Lorraine set a copy in front of me. I read it the way I read every document, completely, without skipping, without assuming I already knew what it said. It took me 11 minutes. When I looked up, Lorraine was watching me. "You understand what it does," she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. What Trust Amendment Number 3 did, in the careful and precise language of estate law, was this. It preserved my status as the primary beneficiary of the Washington Family Trust. On paper, I was still provided for. I would still receive income. I would still live in my home. But the amendment restructured the trust's governance entirely. Raymond and I had been co-trustees of our own trust, meaning we both had equal authority to make decisions about trust assets. After Raymond's death, I was to become sole trustee with full authority. Amendment Number 3 changed that. Upon Raymond's death, Derek Washington and Angela Washington Price would become co-trustees with equal and joint authority over all trust assets. Any decision involving the sale, transfer, refinancing, or significant alteration of trust property required the signatures of both co-trustees. I was not a co-trustee. I was a beneficiary. There is a difference that most people don't know about until it's too late. A beneficiary receives. A trustee decides. Raymond and I had spent 37 years being the people who decided. With one document, signed on a day when Raymond was on his 8th day of a chemotherapy cycle, and had told me the week before that the treatments made him feel like his thoughts were moving through wet concrete. With one document, I had been reduced to someone who received $3,200 a month at the discretion of my children. Everything else, the house worth $1.4 million that I had lived in for 31 years, the rental properties generating $4,800 a month, the investment accounts holding $420,000. All of it now under the control of Derek and Angela. I sat with that for a moment. Then I turned to the asset schedule attached to the amendment and found the section on real property. "The Macon land," I said. He said. Lorraine nodded. "Keep reading. The 4 acres outside Macon, the land Raymond and his brother Jerome had purchased together in 1997, the land Raymond had always said was meant for me, was listed in the amendment's asset schedule under a new designation, not Washington Family Trust, not joint property. Washington Brothers, LLC. I set the document down. "When was that LLC formed?" I asked, though I already had a feeling about the answer. Lorraine slid another sheet across the desk. "Georgia Secretary of State Business Registration. Washington Brothers, LLC. Formation date, March 10th, 2022. 4 days before the amendment was signed. 4 days before Raymond, 8 days into chemotherapy, fighting to keep his thoughts straight, had put his name on a document that handed his brother's share of their jointly held land to a company his son had created without telling me. I looked at the registered agent for Washington Brothers, LLC, Derek A. Washington. Managing member, Derek A. Washington. Secondary member, Jerome L. Washington. I folded my hands on top of the documents. I looked at Lorraine's window, at the Atlanta skyline beyond it, at the particular quality of March light over a city I had lived in for over 40 years. "There's more," Lorraine said quietly. "There always is," I said. "Go ahead." In the course of pulling public records and making preliminary inquiries, Lorraine's paralegal had flagged a document that had been inadvertently included in a filing. Clerical errors happened sometimes, even in well-run law offices, and Derek's office had made one the previous November when responding to a routine estate administration inquiry. The document was an email, printed, not forwarded. Someone had printed it, and it had ended up in a filing envelope that shouldn't have contained it. These things happened. They shouldn't, but they did. The email was sent from Derek's personal Gmail account on March 15th, 2022, the day after the amendment was signed, to Jerome Washington's email address. Lorraine placed a copy in front of me. I read it once, then I read it again. "Uncle Jerome, it's done. Dad signed everything. Mom will be taken care of, but she won't be able to make any major moves without us. The Macon property question will be resolved in our favor. I'll explain more when we meet Thursday." 8 sentences. I had spent 35 years reading financial documents, loan applications, trust instruments, corporate filings, tax returns. I had learned that the most important information was rarely in the largest numbers. It was in the small phrases, the qualifications, the things people said when they thought they were speaking privately. Mom will be taken care of. Not Mom will be in charge. Not Mom will have what she needs. Not even Mom will be okay, taken care of. Like a problem that had been managed, like a variable that had been accounted for and set aside. She won't be able to make any major moves without us. That was the line that told me everything about what this had really been. Not concern for my welfare, not a desire to protect the family's assets, a desire to control them, to ensure that the woman who had co-built every dollar of those assets would not be able to touch them without permission from the children she had raised. The Macon property question will be resolved in our favor. Raymond had been dying, Jerome had been waiting, and Derek had built the mechanism to make sure that when Raymond was gone, the 4 acres outside Macon, worth $340,000 at current market value, would not belong to the woman Raymond had always said it was meant for. It would belong to the LLC, which Derek controlled. I set the email down on top of the amendment. I straightened both pages until their edges were aligned. I looked at Lorraine. "What are my options?" I asked. She picked up her legal pad. "Let me tell you exactly what we can do." 2 weeks after my meeting with Lorraine, she introduced me to Beverly Stokes, a forensic accountant, 52 years old, who had testified as an expert witness in 14 estate litigation cases in the state of Georgia. Beverly had a gift for explaining financial wrongdoing in language that was precise without being incomprehensible, which Lorraine said was the most valuable skill a forensic accountant could have in a courtroom. Beverly spent 3 weeks going through everything: the bank records, the trust account statements, the LLC filings, the property management records for the 3 rental units. She called me twice during that process with questions. Both times I had the answer ready before she finished asking. When she presented her findings, she walked me through them item by item at Lorraine's conference table with printed exhibits that she referenced by number. Item 1. In November of 2022, $28,000 had been transferred from the Washington Family Trust checking account to an account belonging to ATL Property Consulting LLC. Beverly had traced the registration of that LLC. It had been formed in September of 2022, 1 week after Raymond's funeral, by Todd Price, my son-in-law, Angela's husband, the man who had been standing in my kitchen doorway with his arms crossed the day Derek brought the folder. Item 2. In December of 2022, $15,500 had been transferred from the same account, designated as legal fees. Beverly had requested documentation for this payment. There was none. No invoice, no engagement letter, no record of any legal service rendered to the trust in that amount during that period. Item 3. The 3 rental properties had been generating a combined $4,800 per month in rental income since October of 2022. That income had been flowing into the trust account, which Derek now controlled as co-trustee. Not one statement, not one accounting, not one line of documentation showing what had been done with that money had been provided to me in the 5 months since Raymond's death. $4,800 a month, for 5 months. $24,000 of rental income from properties Raymond and I had built, managed, and maintained for decades, and I had not received a single accounting of where it had gone. Item 4. Washington Brothers, LLC had received an offer to purchase the Macon land for $285,000 from a development company called Harwell Group Properties. Beverly had looked at comparable sales in that area for the preceding 18 months. The fair market value of the 4 acres was $340,000. The offer was $55,000 below market. Beverly had also found that one of the managing principals of Harwell Group Properties had attended Emory Law School, class of 2010, the same year Derek had graduated. I looked at that last exhibit for a long moment. He was going to sell it below market to a classmate, I said. That's what the evidence suggests, Beverly said carefully. I can document the below-market pricing and the professional connection. What I can't prove without additional discovery is whether there was a private arrangement between them. You don't need to prove the arrangement, I said. You just need to document the pattern. Beverly looked at me. Exactly right. I had been an accountant for 35 years. I knew how fraud looked when it was being committed by someone intelligent. It didn't look like theft. It looked like management. It looked like consolidation and efficiency in doing what was best for everyone. It looked like a son who loved his mother and wanted to make sure she was taken care of. Until you ran the numbers. And then it looked like exactly what it was. This is the part of the story I want you to understand most clearly. When Lorraine asked me, in our first meeting, about the state of my documentation, when she asked what I had and where it was, I opened my red folder and I showed her. Complete copies of the original Washington Family Trust Declaration, dated and executed in 2018. Both previous amendments, number 1 from 2019, number 2 from 2021, neither of which had changed anything material. The complete asset schedule as of December 31st, 2021. All 4 property deeds. 12 months of bank statements predating Derek's account access. Raymond's and my joint tax returns from 2018 through 2021. Insurance policies. The original engagement letter from the attorney who had drafted the trust in 2018. All of it copied. All of it organized. All of it locked in a safe deposit box at the Wells Fargo branch in Decatur that existed in my name only, that I had opened in November of 2022, the morning after I signed Derek's consolidation paperwork, and lay awake at 3 a.m. feeling like the numbers weren't adding up. Lorraine looked at the folder for a moment. When did you do this? November 2022, the day after Derek brought me documents to sign and explained them faster than I could read them. Most people, she said, come to me with nothing. I know, I said. I've seen what happens to people who come with nothing. I wasn't going to be one of them. And then I reached into my purse and I placed Raymond's blue notebook on her desk. And I told her about the last page. Lorraine read it. She was quiet for a moment. He knew something was wrong, she said. He wasn't sure, I said. He was sick and he was tired and he trusted Derek because Derek was his son. But somewhere in him, enough of Raymond Washington was still there to write that note and leave it where I would find it. I paused. He knew I would find it. He knew I would know what to do with it. There was a long quiet in the room. Raymond was right, Lorraine said finally. It was Lorraine who first said the words that would define the next 8 months of my life. We were at the end of our second full meeting in late March of 2023. Beverly had completed her preliminary findings. Lorraine had reviewed all the documentation. The picture was clear enough that we could see its full shape, even if some of the details still needed filling in. Here is what I want you to understand about your position, Lorraine said, and she spoke with the measured precision of someone who had learned over 28 years to say difficult things without softening them into untruth. You have a strong case. The circumstantial evidence of undue influence is significant. The notary's relationship with Derek is a problem for their side. Raymond's own note is powerful. Beverly's financial analysis is damning. She paused. But if we move now, Derek will know we're coming. He has time to move assets. He has time to create documentation. He has time to build a story. He's an estate attorney. He knows exactly what a challenge looks like, and he will start building his defense the moment that first filing hits the court. I nodded slowly. So we don't move now. We build the case. We make it airtight. We get every piece of evidence documented and preserved and expert verified before we file a single thing. And while we're doing that, I keep smiling at Sunday dinners, I said. Lorraine looked at me. Yes, exactly that. How long? 6 to 9 months, if we do this right. I thought about 6 to 9 months of Derek calling every Sunday for 22 minutes. 6 to 9 months of Angela not meeting my eyes across my own kitchen table. 6 to 9 months of pretending I didn't know what I knew, of accepting $3,200 a month from my own trust like it was a gift instead of a fraction of what was mine. I thought about Raymond, about what he had built, about the note in the blue notebook. I said. We do it right. From April through September of 2023, I performed the role of Sonia Washington, grieving widow, every single day. I went to church every Sunday. I sat in my usual pew, third from the front on the left side, the one Raymond and I had occupied together for 19 years. I sang. I prayed. I spoke to Pastor Okafor after the service and let him ask me how I was doing, and I told him, truthfully, that I was taking it one day at a time. I had Derek over for dinner the first Sunday of every month. I cooked what he liked: baked chicken, collard greens, cornbread from the same recipe my mother had used. I asked about his cases without asking anything specific. I accepted his explanations about the trust administration with the patient, slightly confused nodding of a woman who found financial matters a little beyond her. I had been performing competence my entire professional life. Performing the absence of it was in some ways not much harder. You just reverse the signals. When Derek mentioned in June that he was considering selling one of the rental properties to optimize the portfolio, I looked at him thoughtfully and said, "That sounds complicated, baby. You do the research and show me the numbers." Then I called Lorraine from my car in the church parking lot the following Tuesday and told her word for word what he'd said. When Todd called me in July, Todd, who almost never called me directly, to ask if I'd thought about whether the Buckhead house might be too much house for one person, and whether I'd ever considered moving somewhere more manageable, I told him I appreciated him thinking of me and that I was very comfortable where I was. Then I sat in my kitchen for a while, and I thought about what Raymond would have said about a man who called his mother-in-law to suggest she might want to consider giving up her home. I thought about it for a while. Then I made myself a cup of tea, and I got back to work. Because that was the other thing I did during those 6 months. While I was performing the role of a woman who didn't understand what was happening around her, I was also doing everything Lorraine and Beverly needed me to do. I retrieved the blue notebook from the safe deposit box and had it scanned at a professional document service, with a certified timestamp attached to the digital file. I uploaded the scan to 3 separate cloud storage accounts. One with my own email, one with Lorraine's firm, one with a dear friend in Savannah who had been one of my bridesmaids and who I trusted with my life. I compiled a chronological record of every interaction with Derek related to the trust. Every phone call, every in-person meeting, every document he'd shown me, with dates and summaries, written the same day they occurred, stored the same way as the notebook. I gathered every receipt, every repair bill, every tenant payment record from the 3 rental properties going back to 2018, demonstrating in clear and documented detail that the financial management of those properties had been, at every point, my work. And in April of 2023, I did the most important thing of all. I sat with Lorraine in her conference room, with the door closed and no one else present, and I signed a new document, the Sonia Washington Irrevocable Trust, my assets, my terms, my beneficiaries. Spelman College, 40%, for scholarships for first-generation Black students studying accounting and finance, under the name Raymond and Sonia Washington First Generation Scholarship. Pastor Calvin Okafor's Community Foundation, 30%, for the youth financial literacy program he'd been trying to fund for 3 years. Jerome's 2 grandchildren, the ones I'd watched grow up at Christmas dinners, the ones who had nothing to do with what their grandfather had agreed to, 30%, held until they turned 25. Derek's name was not in it. Angela's name was not in it. Todd Price's name had never been in any document of mine, and never would be. I signed it with a steady hand. Lorraine witnessed it. We locked the original in her firm's safe, placed a copy in my safe deposit box, and sent a 3rd copy to my friend in Savannah. Then I drove home, put a pot of soup on the stove, and called Derek for our regular Sunday conversation. "How are you, baby?" I said when he picked up. "Good, Mom. Busy week. How are you doing?" "Oh, I'm fine," I said, taking it one day at a time. Outside my kitchen window, the Buckhead neighborhood was green and gold in the late afternoon light. The garden Raymond had planted along the back fence, roses and hydrangeas, his mother's favorites, was coming into its summer bloom. I stirred the soup. I waited. On the morning of September 14th, 2023, Lorraine Dupree walked into the Fulton County Probate Court on Pryor Street in downtown Atlanta and filed a petition to contest Trust Amendment Number 3 in the matter of the Washington Family Revocable Living Trust. It was a Friday. I know because I had chosen the date deliberately. 1 year to the day since Raymond Washington had been buried in the red Georgia clay at Greenwood Cemetery, in the plot we had purchased together in 2019, because Raymond believed in being practical about things that were certain. I was not in court when Lorraine filed. I was at my kitchen table in Buckhead, drinking the same blend of tea I had been drinking every morning for 20 years, reading the same Bible passage I had read on every morning that required courage since I was old enough to know what courage cost. She is clothed with strength and dignity, and she laughs without fear of the future. I had underlined it in 1987. The ink had faded to brown. At 10:47 that morning, according to Derek's office assistant, who would recount this detail months later, the way people recount the small moments that turned out to matter, Derek Washington received the court filing notification at his Midtown office. He read it at his desk. He sat without moving for approximately 4 minutes. Then he picked up his phone and called Angela. I don't know what he said to her. I know that Angela called me 40 minutes later, her voice careful in the way it got when she was trying to manage something she didn't know how to manage. "Mom, did you hire an attorney?" "Yes, baby," I said. "I did." A pause. "Derek is upset." "I imagine he is. He says this is a misunderstanding. He says if you just talk to him—" "Angela." I kept my voice even. Warm, even. The way I had kept it for 23 years of mothering a child who needed warmth more than she needed confrontation. "I love you, but this is between me and the court now. You need to talk to your own attorney." Another pause. Longer this time. "Mom, I want you to know that I never wanted—" "I know," I said. And the truth was, I did know. Angela had not built this. She had been built into it by a brother who was smarter than her about certain things, and a husband who had needed her to go along. That didn't excuse her, but I understood it. "Get yourself an attorney, sweetheart," I said, "and take care of those babies." I hung up and sat for a moment with the phone in my hand. Then I refilled my tea and went back to work. The legal document Lorraine filed was 43 pages long and built on 4 distinct grounds. The first was lack of testamentary capacity. Raymond Washington had been on his 8th day of a chemotherapy cycle on March 14, 2022, a fact documented in his medical records at Emory University Hospital. The specific drug combination he was receiving, his oncologist would later confirm in a sworn affidavit, was known to cause significant cognitive effects including confusion, difficulty concentrating, and impaired short-term memory. Raymond's own note, I don't remember what I signed, supported this directly. The second was undue influence. Derek Washington had held a limited power of attorney for certain financial matters since January of 2022, granted by Raymond during the early weeks of his illness when paperwork needed to be handled, and Raymond wasn't always able to leave the house. This created a fiduciary relationship. A son who holds fiduciary authority over a sick father's affairs and then presents that father with documents transferring control of the family trust is not acting as a loving child. He is acting as an interested party, and the law views that distinction seriously. The third was notary misconduct. David Hargrove, the notary who had certified Raymond's signature at the hospital on March 14th, was not a neutral party. Beverly Stokes had traced a professional connection. Hargrove's firm had been retained by Derek's law office for notarial services on 4 separate corporate transactions between 2020 and 2022. He had a financial relationship with Derek that he had not disclosed. A notary whose role is to serve as an impartial witness to a signature cannot also be a professional associate of the party benefiting from that signature. The fourth was fraudulent transfer. Washington Brothers LLC had been formed on March 10, 2022, 4 days before the amendment was signed. The inclusion of the Macon land in that LLC, combined with the email Derek had sent to Jerome the following day confirming the plan, combined with the subsequent below-market sale offer to a professional associate, this was a pattern. Patterns, Beverly Stokes would testify, told stories that individual transactions tried to hide. Attached to the petition, Beverly's 67-page forensic accounting report, Raymond's blue notebook, certified copy, with authenticated timestamp, the hospital nursing notes from March 14, 2022, the email from Derek to Jerome, 3 months of pre-access bank statements, complete original trust documentation from the safe deposit box in Decatur, 43 pages, built over 9 months, every page backed by something real. Lorraine had told me the first time we met that most clients came to her with nothing. I had come with a foundation. Now we were going to find out if it would hold. 3 weeks after the petition was filed, Derek's attorney, Harold Sims, a former Fulton County prosecutor who had been Derek's friend since Emory, filed a cross-petition. It was aggressive. It was well-crafted. And it was, I will admit, the moment in this process that came closest to shaking me. The cross-petition argued 2 things. First, that I was acting under the influence of outside parties, specifically Lorraine Dupree, whom it characterized as having a financial interest in prolonged litigation. Second, and more dangerously, that I was no longer fully capable of managing complex financial affairs independently, and that my contest of the amendment was itself evidence of poor judgment that the Trust's co-trustees had been right to anticipate and protect against. To support this, Harold Sims had found an email I had written to Raymond in the spring of 2021, during a particularly exhausting stretch of the pandemic, when I had been managing 3 rental properties remotely while also caring for Raymond through his first round of medical tests. The email read, in part, "Honey, I am so tired of dealing with these properties by myself. If there was someone who could help with the day-to-day, I would not argue." Derek intended to use that email to argue that I had expressed, in writing, a desire to transfer the management burden of the trust assets, that the amendment had been responsive to my own stated wishes. When Lorraine called me and read me that email over the phone, I sat very still. I remembered writing it. I remembered the day, a Tuesday in April, a burst pipe at the College Park property, a tenant who was 3 weeks behind on rent, and Raymond sitting in our living room with a medical pamphlet in his hands that neither of us wanted to discuss. I had been exhausted. I had said so to my husband. I had not said, "Please arrange for our children to take control of our life's work without my knowledge or consent." "Can they use it?" I asked Lorraine. "They can try," she said. "What it actually says is that you were tired, which is human. What it doesn't say is anything close to what they're implying. But a sympathetic reading by the wrong judge, what do? We need something that directly contradicts the narrative that you wanted to step back. Something that shows your active, ongoing involvement in the trust management, not just before the amendment, but after." I thought for a moment. Beverly has my documentation. Every repair bill, every lease renewal, every property management decision from 2018 through the end of 2022. Every single one has my initials on it. Because Raymond always said, "Sonia May, you sign what you authorize, so you always know what you authorized." A pause on the line. "How complete is that documentation?" "Complete," I said. "I was an accountant for 35 years. Complete means complete." I heard Lorraine exhale slowly. "Get it to Beverly by Friday." I had it to Beverly by Wednesday. On a Wednesday evening in the second week of October, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I'm glad I did. "Sonia." The voice was quiet, careful. "It's Jerome." I sat down. Jerome Washington had not called me directly since Raymond's funeral. We had spoken at family gatherings, politely, briefly, in the way of people who shared history without sharing trust. I had not included him in my mental category of allies. I had not included him in my mental category of enemies either. He was Raymond's brother, and I had chosen to leave him in his own category, unlabeled, until I understood him better. "Jerome," I said, "I know you don't have any reason to take this call." "I'm taking it," I said. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had the particular quality of a man who has been rehearsing something and has just decided to abandon the rehearsal and say it plain. I didn't know it was going to go this far. What Derek told me, back in the beginning when he first came to me. He said the purpose was to protect the family assets. He said you were grieving and vulnerable, and that someone needed to have legal authority to make decisions fast if something came up. He said you'd still have everything you needed. He said it was for your benefit. I said nothing. "I know that's not an excuse," Jerome said. "I know that. Raymond was my brother, and what I let happen to his wife—" His voice broke slightly, then steadied. "I let it happen because I wanted the Macon land. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Derek told me the LLC would give me a share of the proceeds when it sold, and I said yes, and I have to live with that." "Yes," I said. "You do. I want to testify for you." I looked out my kitchen window at the garden Raymond had planted. The roses were done for the season. The hydrangeas had dried to pale ghosts of themselves along the fence. "In exchange for what?" I asked, because I had been an accountant for 35 years, and I knew that no transaction came without terms. "I don't want you to name me in the fraud claim for the Macon land. I know I was part of it. I know what it cost you. But Claire—" He stopped. "Claire didn't know anything about it. She thought the LLC was just a business thing. If I'm named in a fraud suit, it doesn't just affect me." I thought about Raymond, about the way he had talked about Jerome, with love, with a clear-eyed understanding of his brother's weaknesses, with the kind of forgiveness that didn't require pretending the weaknesses weren't there. Raymond always said Jerome was weak, not wicked. I believed Raymond about most things. I took 48 hours. I prayed about it. I talked to Lorraine, who confirmed that Jerome's testimony about the March planning meeting and the email would significantly strengthen the undue influence claim, and that I could exclude him from the fraud claim without materially weakening the financial case. I called Jerome back on a Friday morning. I won't name you in the fraud claim, I said, but I need you to tell the complete truth in that deposition, not the version that's easiest for you. Everything. Yes, he said immediately. Everything. And Jerome. I paused. The Macon land comes back to the trust. All of it. I don't want the LLC. I don't want the proceeds. I want the land Raymond and I planned for. That's non-negotiable. A long silence. Yes, he said finally. That's right. That's how it should be. I hung up and sat at my kitchen table for a while, thinking about Raymond, about how he used to say that most people weren't bad. They were just afraid, or they were greedy, or they had let someone convince them that what they wanted and what was right were the same thing. Raymond, I said quietly to the empty kitchen, your brother's going to do the right thing. I could almost hear him. Good, he would have said. I always thought he had it in him. The deposition of Derek Washington was scheduled for November 14th, 2023, at Lorraine's office on Peachtree Street. Derek arrived with Harold Sims and a leather portfolio and the composed, professional manner of a man who had spent 13 years in rooms exactly like this one and knew how to conduct himself in them. He answered Lorraine's opening questions about the trust's history and his role in its administration with the measured precision of someone who had prepared carefully. He was good. I had always known Derek was good at this. Lorraine let him be good for the first 40 minutes. She asked about timelines and procedures and fiduciary responsibilities, and Derek answered everything correctly and cited the relevant Georgia statutes with the ease of someone who had not only studied them, but written about them in professional publications. Then Lorraine set a document on the table. It was 2 pages. Header, Emory University Hospital, Nursing Progress Notes. Date, March 14th, 2022. Patient, Raymond James Washington. Derek looked at it. His expression didn't change, but his posture did. Something very slight, a fractional settling, like a building registering a tremor too small for most people to detect. Mr. Washington, Lorraine said, I'd like you to review the nursing notes from the day your father signed Trust Amendment No. 3. Harold Sims leaned over to read the document. I watched his face. The notes had been written by the nurse on duty that afternoon, a woman named Patricia Givens, who had worked oncology at Emory for 19 years before retiring in the spring of 2023. She was methodical and experienced, and she had documented what she observed with the straightforward thoroughness of someone who understood that medical notes were legal documents and treated them accordingly. The relevant passage read, Patient expressed confusion regarding documents presented by family member, son. Patient asked nurse, what am I signing on 2 separate occasions during the visit? Family member explained documents were routine estate paperwork. Patient appeared fatigued and mildly disoriented, consistent with current treatment cycle, day 8. Patient signed documents. Nurse noted patient's hand tremor consistent with current medication protocol. Lorraine had found Patricia Givens through Raymond's oncology team. The retired nurse had agreed to give a sworn affidavit without hesitation. I remember that visit, Patricia Givens had told Lorraine, according to the affidavit. I remember because I almost said something. Mr. Washington asked twice what he was signing. That stays with you. When a patient asks twice, it means something isn't clear to them. I should have intervened. I've thought about it since. She had agreed to testify if the case went to trial. Derek read the nursing notes. He read them completely, the way I had taught both my children to read documents, without skimming, without assuming. I had taught him that. When he looked up, Harold Sims was already writing something on a notepad. Lorraine said quietly, Your father asked the nurse twice what he was signing, Mr. Washington. Were you aware that he was confused about the documents you presented to him? Derek said nothing for a moment. I'd like to take a short recess, Harold Sims said. Of course, Lorraine said. In the hallway, during that recess, Harold Sims found Lorraine's paralegal and asked her to let Lorraine know that his client would like to discuss the possibility of a settlement conversation. December 5th, 2023, Lorraine's conference room, 10 in the morning. I had chosen what to wear with some care, not to impress anyone, not to perform anything. I wore the navy dress I had worn to Raymond's retirement celebration in 2019, when the firm had given him a plaque and a standing ovation, and he had cried, embarrassed and happy, in the car on the way home. It was a dress that meant something to me. I wanted to be wearing something that meant something. Derek sat across the table with Harold Sims. Angela sat beside Derek, her hands folded in her lap. Todd had not been invited. There was no legal basis for his presence, and Harold Sims, to his credit, had apparently advised against it. Jerome sat at the far end of the table, looking at the wood grain. Claire was not there. Lorraine sat to my right. Beverly sat to my left. Harold Sims presented Derek's offer. His voice was professionally neutral, emptied of the confidence it had carried 3 months earlier. The terms: Trust Amendment No. 3 would be vacated and declared void. The Washington Family Trust would be restored to its original 2018 structure, with me as sole trustee upon Raymond's death, as had always been the intention. The $43,500 in improperly transferred funds, the $28,000 to Todd's LLC, and the $15,500 in undocumented legal fees would be returned to the trust account within 30 days. Washington Brothers, LLC would be dissolved. The Macon land would be returned to the trust's asset schedule at fair market value. In exchange, I would not pursue criminal fraud charges. I would not file a complaint against David Hargrove with the Georgia Notary Commission. I would not seek punitive damages. Harold Sims finished speaking. The room was quiet. Lorraine looked at me. I looked at the people across the table. Derek, who had the same wide forehead as his sister, the same forehead as Raymond, who had looked at blueprints and seen buildings before anyone had broken ground. Angela, who was looking at her folded hands. Jerome, who was looking at nothing. I have one additional condition, I said. Harold Sims' pen paused above his notepad. Derek, I looked at my son directly. You will resign from any role in the Washington Family Trust, not co-trustee, not advisor, not executor. You will have no legal relationship to these assets from this day forward. Not you, and not anyone acting on your behalf. Derek's jaw tightened slightly. Angela, I turned to my daughter, and I kept my voice even because this was not about punishment. It was about clarity. You and Todd will not be named as direct beneficiaries in my estate documents. I have made provisions for your children, held in a separate educational trust, managed by an independent trustee, not accessible to you or Todd until they reach adulthood. I love my grandchildren, but the path to them does not run through either of you. Angela closed her eyes briefly. A tear moved down her face, and she didn't wipe it. Jerome. I looked at Raymond's brother. He looked up. You will sign a full release of any claim to the Macon land, personally, and through any entity you're connected to. Every acre goes back to the trust. That land was Raymond's. It was always meant to be mine. You know that. Jerome nodded once. Yes, he said. I know that. Todd was not in the room, but I addressed his absence directly. And I want it clearly understood, I said, that Todd Price has no standing in any conversation about these assets, now or at any point in the future. His name will not appear in any document related to the Washington Family Trust or my personal estate. If he has questions about that, he is welcome to consult his own attorney. Harold Sims cleared his throat. Mrs. Washington, the question of— I'm not finished, I said. He stopped. I looked at Derek one more time. He was looking at the table. I waited until he looked up. I want you to hear this from me directly, Derek. Not from Lorraine. Not in a filing. From me. He met my eyes. Your father asked the nurse twice what he was signing. He was on day 8 of chemotherapy and he was confused and he asked twice. And you kept going. The room was absolutely silent. I cannot forgive that. I don't know if I ever will, but I also will not let it destroy what your father and I built in 37 years, because that would mean what you did had won, and it has not won. I let the silence hold for a moment. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because Raymond Washington spent his life building something real, and I intend to honor that. Sign the documents. Derek picked up the pen. He signed. Angela signed. Jerome signed. Lorraine collected the papers and aligned them in a neat stack. Beverly closed her notebook. I stood, put on my coat, and picked up my purse. At the door, I paused. I didn't turn around. Raymond built things that were meant to last, I said. So did I. Then I walked out into the December morning. The legal process was completed by the end of January 2024. The Washington Family Trust was restored to its original structure. $43,500 was returned to the trust account on January 18th. Washington Brothers, LLC filed for dissolution on January 22nd. The Macon land, 4 acres outside Macon, Georgia, independently appraised at $355,000 in the current market, $15,000 more than Beverly's original estimate, was returned to the trust's asset schedule and formally designated, in writing, as I had always understood it to be. Raymond's land, my land. I hired a professional property management company, a woman-owned firm in Decatur with 20 years of experience and an impeccable reputation, to manage the 3 rental properties. They sent me a clear, detailed accounting statement on the 1st of every month. I reviewed each one the same morning it arrived. In March of 2024, 6 months after the petition was filed, and 23 years after Pastor Calvin Okafor had first mentioned wanting to teach young people in our congregation about money, I wrote a check for $85,000 to the Okafor Community Foundation's Youth Financial Literacy Initiative. The program launched that September with 43 students between the ages of 14 and 19. They learned about budgeting, about credit, about how compound interest worked both for you and against you, about what an estate document was and why it mattered and who had the right to touch it. Raymond would have loved that program. He would have sat in the back row and asked too many questions and made the instructor laugh. In June, Lorraine helped me formalize the scholarship at Spelman, the Raymond and Sonia Washington First Generation Scholarship, endowed at $120,000, supporting students in accounting and finance whose families had not attended 4-year universities. The first recipient was a young woman from Augusta, Georgia, who reminded me of myself at 19 in a way I couldn't entirely explain, but recognized immediately. I kept every promise I made in that conference room. I did not pursue criminal charges. I did not file a complaint against David Hargrove. I did not tell anyone at our church what had happened. Not the details, not the names, not the amounts. When people asked how I was doing, I told them I was getting stronger every day, which was the truth. I did not reach out to Derek. He called me twice in the spring, once in April, once in May. I let both calls go to voicemail. The messages were short, careful, the voice of a man who had not yet figured out what he actually wanted to say. I listened to both of them. I did not call back. Angela sent a card at Easter, a simple one, pastel flowers on the front, a few sentences in her handwriting inside. Mom, I love you. I am so sorry. I don't expect you to understand right now. I just wanted you to know. I read it several times. I put it in my desk drawer. I was not ready. I might not be for a long time. I had told the truth in that conference room when I said I understood Angela better than I understood Derek. But understanding was not the same as being able to go back. Some things, once broken, needed a very long time before anyone should try to repair them. Rushing that process would only deepen the damage. I was patient. Patience was something I had been practicing for 64 years. On a Sunday afternoon in April of 2024, a year and 7 months after Raymond was buried, 7 months after Lorraine had filed that petition, 4 months after I had walked out of a conference room having taken back everything that was mine, I went into the backyard of my Buckhead home and I planted roses. Not because the garden needed more roses. Raymond had already planted plenty. But because I needed to do something with my hands that had nothing to do with documents or depositions or the careful construction of legal arguments. I needed to put something in the ground and trust that it would grow. I knelt in the Georgia dirt with a trowel and a flat of bare root roses from the garden center on Peachtree Road, and I planted 6 of them along the back fence where Raymond's hydrangeas grew. My knees reminded me I was 64. I told my knees to hush. When I was done, I sat back on my heels and looked at the garden, at what Raymond had grown and what I had just added. And I thought about what my father had written in his composition notebook ledger in the kitchen in Savannah all those years ago. He had written, at the top of the first page of every year, the same heading. What came in? What went out? What remains? I thought about that. What had come in the 37 years of my marriage? Love and work and 2 children, and property after property after property, built with patience and discipline, and 2 people who trusted each other absolutely. A life, a real one. What had gone out? Raymond himself, which was a loss I would carry every remaining day of my life. A son I was not sure I knew anymore. A daughter I was not yet ready to reach toward. Trust that had been broken in ways I was still learning the shape of. What remained? Everything that was real. The house, the land, the scholarship, the program for young people learning to count their own money, the memory of Raymond's hand in mine at closing after closing after closing, the blue notebook in my desk drawer that I would keep for the rest of my life. And myself. Still here. Still counting. I stood up slowly and brushed the dirt from my hands. Inside, the kettle was on.